and we will be strenuously opposing them.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I too want to pick up where my colleague Chris Hipkins left off, looking at clause 42 of this bill. And let's be absolutely clear what clause 42 does. It takes away the rights of New Zealanders to find out what is going on in a charter school via the Official Information Act. It says that people who operate charter schools will not have to be subject to that act. And, Mr Chair, I want to be very specific about who the people are who should care about that. It is the parents of the children who end up at those schools, because they will not have the same rights as parents of children at other schools. I've been doing it because they won't have. Dr. Corder says, why not? He doesn't even know. He doesn't. He says, why not? And that's what we want to know, Dr. Corder. That's the very thing we want to know, is why should those parents not have that right? At the moment, John Banks has defended this by saying it's all right because the Secretary of Education can find out what's going on in a charter school. So it's okay for the Secretary of Education to be able to ask questions about what's happening in a school, but it's not okay for the parents of the children who attend that school. That is wrong. It undermines the fundamental nature of the relationship between parents and the schools to whom they entrust their children. And that is being undermined by this approach from the National Party. When the Ombudsman was asked to comment on this proposal that these schools not be subject to the Official Information Act, the Chief Ombudsman, Beverly Wakeham, said that these proposals were unconstitutional and catastrophic. Unconstitutional and catastrophic. Beverly Wakeham is a very good ombudsman, and she is not a person who is prone to exaggeration or going over the top. Yeah, well, she's had to go to the government to try and get money out of them so her office can actually operate properly, and she had to go, and still we did get some advance on that, but still there are thousands of complaints backlogged. But she came to the committee and said unconstitutional. And once again, after having been here through urgency just over a week ago, where more and more unconstitutional provisions were put forward, where regulatory impact statements with everything blacked out, where we didn't have Bill of Rights vets, where we weren't able to access the pieces of legislation until the moment they arrived here, we're back here again with another provision, that is Clause 42, that has been described by the Ombudsman as unconstitutional. I want members of Parliament and those watching and listening tonight to think about that for a minute. The government has been told by the person who is charged on behalf of all New Zealand citizens with upholding our openness and transparency within government that this provision is unconstitutional. And they press ahead with it anyway. Mr Chair. Modifications were made around access to the Ombudsman, but not around the Official Information Act. And that, Mr Speaker, I believe is one of the most shameful things about this bill. We can argue about the ideological drive that's behind it, sure. But once upon a time, the National Party stood for some kind of transparency. They actually passed the Official Information Act in 1982. But today, they come to this House and they say, for some parents, you don't get to access that. Well, what kind of transparency is that? What kind of accountability is that? It's not only for the parents, Mr Chair, it's also for everybody else, because these charter schools will be getting large amounts of public money. John Banks's party is supposedly called the Association of Consumers and Taxpayers. The Association of Consumers and Taxpayers. Except Mr Banks doesn't want those consumers and taxpayers to know about what's happening in his precious ideological experiment that is charter schools. Paul Goldsmith wrote the biography of John Banks. Perhaps he could get up and take a call and justify to this House today why it is that somebody who purports to represent the Association of Consumers and Taxpayers is denying the right of New Zealanders to actually see what these institutions are doing. This is a What was that? Oh, no, Mr Goldsmith sits there. He wants to... Mr Chair?
Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Mr Goldsmith sits there. He's not prepared to stand up and take a call and actually justify to this Parliament why the Official Information Act should not apply. As I said, we can argue about the merits of charter schools, but what on earth is the argument to stop New Zealanders being able to follow where their taxpayer money goes? I thought that's what people on the other side of the House purported to stand for. Transparency, that we would know that taxpayer money should be used well. We constantly hear it from the National Party side of the House, that New Zealanders need to know what their taxpayer money has been spent on. It can't be wasted. But tonight, they come to the House with Clause 42 of this bill and say to New Zealanders, you don't deserve to know what's happening in these charter schools. These charter schools will be looked after by us. Trust us, there's nothing to see here. Well, I agree with my colleague Chris Hipkins. The reason for that is they don't want New Zealanders to know. They don't want New Zealanders to know about just how much money is going in, just how much profit is being extracted off the back of New Zealand children. They don't want New Zealanders to know about what's going on when you've got unqualified teachers in front of a classroom of students. And that should be even more reason, Mr Chair, to allow the Official Information Act to apply to these charter schools, because this is an experiment. It is a fundamental change to New Zealand's education system. Things will be being done completely differently. Well, no, that's one of Mr Banks's favourite phrases, Mr Mallard. Nothing to fear, nothing to hide. That's what he told us about Kim.com. Well, the same thing should apply here to charter schools. If there's nothing to fear here, New Zealanders deserve the opportunity to be able to make Official Information Act requests. Let's also be clear, it doesn't mean it's opening the door. We all know that the Official Information Act has a number of clauses that allow material to be withheld if there is good reason for that. Judith Collins thinks it's okay to withhold the name of someone who interviewed Jackie Blue. I don't think that's justified, but there are other issues that are justifiable. So it's not an open slather. What it is a window for New Zealanders as to how their taxpayer dollars are being spent, and it's a very important function for parents to know what is happening in the school where their children go. I have just been dealing with an electric case where a parent has had a significant issue with their school over the treatment of a child with special needs, and they used the Official Information Act to ensure that they could find out information that was relevant to the case for their child. There was no other way we would have been able to find that information out for that parent. The only way we could do that was under the Official Information Act, and that is being denied to the parents of the children who are in these schools. Mr Chair, Clause 42 is actually about much more than charter schools. Clause 42 is about a fundamental closing off of an aspect of our democracy. And when the Chief Ombudsman comes to Parliament and says this is an unconstitutional provision that will have catastrophic consequences, or potentially catastrophic consequences, the government should be listening, and they have failed. And Chris Hipkins mentioned earlier on the case where the systemic bullying at Hutt Valley High School. That only came about because that was only uncovered because the Ombudsman was able to be involved. By having Clause 43, which narrowly defines the issues that the Ombudsman can be involved in, is also unacceptable. It does not provide parents with the recourse that they should be able to expect to be able to provide. It does not provide communities with the ability to actually take cases and know that there will be an independent watchdog that will cast some light on what is going on in here. Mr Chair, this entire process of the implementation of these charter schools goes against everything that the New Zealand public education system has stood for. Qualified teachers, every child getting the same opportunities, and parents having confidence. This bill shouldn't pass.
Colin King.
Mr Chair, thank you very much. It's
voice of reason.